Please.
Thank you, Senator Newman and the special committee for this invitation. I'll start by saying I don't look anything like the typical child care provider. The average child care provider is a 30 to 60-year-old woman, likely a woman of color. Today, let's call her Maria. Maria got into child care after attending EC classes at night, because after caring for her niece, she had this feeling that wouldn't go away. The feeling of love, seeing the change she can make in a child's life. The feeling that this is what her life's purpose is. After 5 years of classes, 3 years of teaching, 2 bank loans, and many IOUs from family and friends, Maria opened a 1-classroom childcare center so she can make change in more children's lives. Fast forward to January 2020, 26 years after starting her childcare. She's been running and expanding it. Now she has 4 classrooms, and she's as passionate as ever. But she's tired. She's tired of the constant ratcheting up of requirements, tired of the annual threat of TK taking away her program, and tired of still being treated like she's just a babysitter. Then the pandemic hits, and Maria is enveloped with uncertainty and stress. But she endures, continuing to serve families who are all nearly essential workers, and paying her teachers directly out of her meager personal savings account. Things are hard, the hardest they've ever been. But they'll work out, she tells herself. 4 months later, July 15th, 0 COVID cases so far. Wearing masks, social distancing, keeping her teachers in their own classrooms. The state releases a PDF on new cohort and cleaning guidance, limiting the size of her classrooms, restricting her ratios, requiring her to divide classrooms with floor-to-ceiling, non-penetrable barriers, and to keep her 2-year-olds 6 feet apart at all times. She's reread it 10 times. That's what it says. She has to do that stuff. She can't believe it, and she simply can't do it. She already can't pay rent. She can't modify her program to these standards, and she can't even keep her teachers employed when the threat of COVID is so great. Now, these things are not going to work out. It's time to quit, throw in the towel, and since no one will take over childcare during a pandemic, she shuts it down forever, removing all 96 childcare spots. But the story's not over. See, a week after closing, Maria talks to a friend and hears that the cohort and cleaning PDF wasn't about regulations after all. It was simply provided as guidance. But Maria's not a lawyer. She can't differentiate should, shall, must. And she always does right by her children, her families, her staff, and the state. While this guidance was meant to help providers navigate building safe procedures, it put many of them out of business because it wasn't clear that it was just guidance. Many of them turned to CQEL and nonprofits like ours for help, as they could not get clear communications from state agencies. Those we helped, and many stayed open. But many, like Maria, didn't get help until it was too late. Maria's not a real person, but rather a representation of the experiences of hundreds of childcares, many of whom are still experiencing the same exact needless issue today. Since March 2020, 2,160 childcares have permanently closed statewide. Childcare providers mean well and do well, but get stuck in the opaqueness of government speak. They get snagged in the red tape of licensing procedures, and they get pummeled with legislation that shrinks their resources and increases their emotional debt every single year. To legislators and agencies, we ask for childcare providers to be given clear and consistent guidance. We ask for the erasure of unnecessary rules and regulations that do more harm than good. we ask for the same respect, care, and decency to be given to essential childcare workers as they give to our children and families every day. And above all, we ask legislators here to advocate for providers. Be the childcare legislator who backs up and stands up for providers who otherwise don't have a voice. Build bridges instead of blockades. Build discourse instead of discord. After all, advocating for childcare is advocating for our children's futures. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Resman. Ms. Hundress, please.
Hi, good evening. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Mr. Merrick, please proceed.
Thank you. Childcare capacity was insufficient to meet the needs of California families before the pandemic. However, since March 2020, untold numbers of childcare centers in California have permanently shut their doors. Operating under current conditions is challenging for all, but impossible for many, so others will surely follow. Supporting public health is everyone's collective responsibility, and childcare centers have shown that they're doing their part successfully. But California is facing a childcare capacity and infrastructure crisis, the impact of which has not even been fully realized. It's not too late to act, and there are steps the state can take to help contain the crisis. So what can California do? I'm going to focus on just one thing, the one thing that may very well have the greatest positive impact. The issue is cohort size. We all agree that maintaining stable groups that are as small as possible is important to reduce the risk of infection and limit potential exposure. However, cohorting has a corresponding effect of limiting the number of children a childcare center can enroll, thereby constraining revenue. Since most childcare centers operate under thin margins, capping enrollment means centers can, at best, break even. More typically, they're operating at a loss and using personal resources to cover the difference. This can only continue for so long before a childcare center is forced to close its doors. With enrollment limited at individual childcare centers, that means California's overall childcare capacity is reduced. As we hopefully emerge from pandemic emergency response mode this year, it's critical to recognize the importance of cohort limits on childcare capacity. If childcare centers must limit enrollment, or if they no longer offer enrollment because they no longer exist, families will have a hard time going back to work, which will consequently put a drag on California's economy for a long time to come. On the subject of cohorting, the last time the California Department of Social Services, in collaboration with the California Department of Education, issued guidance for childcare programs and providers was on July 17, 2020. While the guidance provided in July, 4 months after the start of the pandemic, may have been appropriate at the time, it should be noted that its original intent was to provide guidance for K-12 schools to follow when students meet for targeted support and intervention services while the school is closed to in-person instruction. For reasons that are not entirely clear, childcare centers were included in this category, even though the California Department of Social Services strictly regulates childcare centers and determines childcare capacity based on the square footage of classrooms. Interestingly, the California Department of Social Services requires minimum indoor square footage in childcare centers at 35 per child. If you do the math, the minimum square footage required to maintain 6 foot physical distance is a bit less than 30 per individual. The point is this: childcare centers in California are already licensed to ensure physical distancing for up to the maximum number of children they are allowed to enroll. But childcare centers are at yet another disadvantage. Under California's reopening framework for K-12 schools, once a school is open, the cohort size is unspecified, meaning the number of group members can vary based on the size of the physical space provided. Membership is fixed and stable. There is no such consideration for childcare centers, which poses serious short-term consequences to the viability of childcare centers, the successful reopening of California's economy, and the long-term state of childcare capacity and infrastructure in California. So here's the key takeaway. Regardless of the rationale for putting greater operating restrictions on childcare centers that are in place for K through 12 schools, continuing with this approach will have devastating long-term consequences to childcare capacity and infrastructure. Title 22 regulations are more than adequate to ensure cohort sizes are kept as small as possible and provides childcare centers with the same important flexibility that K through 12 schools have to operate safely. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to participate on this panel. I appreciate the work you're doing to help the people of California and wish you well as we prepare to emerge from this crisis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Merrick. Ms. Jacobson, please, your testimony.